Now, I don't know if you feel the same way, but for me personally, frost weapons in Elden Ring are criminally underrated. The fact that some of them have such high damage outputs that they're similar to those of a meta bleed build is enough on its own to put it up there in the overpowered bracket. But then when you also come to learn that the frost affinity will slow down your enemies and reduce their defense, meaning they take even more further damage, it's really hard to argue that frost weapons are not incredibly overpowered. And so, in light of that, today we're going to be having a look at the top 5 frost weapons that you can use in Elden Ring right now. And again, also just to throw the little caveat in, I am only going to be talking about weapons that come naturally with the frost abilities. I am not talking about any standard weapon that you can infuse with a frost Ash of War. I am purely only talking about the unique frost weapons that you can find throughout the lands between. And so to kick things off in the number 5 spot, we've got none other than the Heth Steep. It is an incredibly powerful greatsword with one of the most unique Ashes of War, and it's relatively easy to obtain. All you need to do is work your way through the game until you get to the mountaintop of the giants, head past the freezing lake as if you're going towards Castle Sol, and on the right hand side there's going to be a little ledge you can drop down where there will be a Tibia Marina just residing on the edge of the cliff. As you can probably guess, upon defeating that mariner you will then be granted with the Heth Steeple, and as I say, you will then have access to a really powerful greatsword that you will then be able to infuse it with the Ghost Flame abilities. And the beautiful thing about Ghost Flame is it deals frost damage against your enemies. Now, just to sort of get the bad point out of the way first, the Ash of War that infuses the weapon with that Ghost Flame ability is purely just a supportive Ash of War, and it doesn't grant any other type of like unique attacking moves. Granted, it does still do damage if you're close enough to an enemy whilst using that infusion, but realistically you're never going to be that up close and personal with a boss, so you will be typically using this weapon just like any other standard greatsword. But what you can do is either double up on this weapon and have one in each hand and power stance your way through the game, dealing a lot of frost damage on top of the great base damage that you have with this weapon, or you can also mix it in with a battle mage type build. That is because this weapon does scale with intelligence, meaning that you can perfectly mix this in with all sorts of different spells and essentially get the versatility that way rather than just relying on the sword. Because the weapon itself isn't all that versatile and doesn't necessarily have too much of a uniqueness about it apart from the way it looks, because damn, it looks cool, but in terms of damage output and moveset, it is just basically a standard greatsword. But again, where greatswords are so good, it had to find a place on this list, so I felt like putting it in the number 5 spot was a perfect benchmark for what's to come, because the rest of the weapons we're going to talk about are miles better in my opinion, and that's only a good thing because the Heth Steeple is still very, very good. But just to give you an example of what I mean by everything else being so much better, at the number 4 spot we've got ourselves the Dragon Scale Blade. Now this thing really does up both the coolness factor and the deadly factor, as this thing literally slices through pretty much any enemy in the game. Again, the way that you get this is by completing Rani's questline, or at least the majority of the way through it until you get to the Lake of Rot. And then once you have access to this area, if you sort of keep left, you should find the Dragon Skin boss, which is just sat waiting for you to come and take him down. And yep, you guessed it, once defeating him, you will then get the Dragon Scale Blade. Not only is this a very cool, powerful and unique frost weapon, but it's also possibly one of the coolest katanas in the game, and much like most of the katanas, also scales with strength and dexterity. Its unique skill power, the Ice Lightning Sword, will infuse the weapon with not only frost damage, but also lightning damage, meaning you've got 2 buffs on the weapon at the same time, dealing both extra damage and of course that frost proc. The other unique thing about this particular katana is it does additional damage against dragons, believe it or not, hence the name of the sword. In fact, it does 10% extra damage to ancient dragons and 20% extra damage to regular dragons in the game. Usually, dragons are also resistant against slash damage, which is what katanas are, they're a slashing sword. So again, this katana counteracts what would normally be a defect against most katanas, making it incredibly useful against pretty much any enemy in the game. Much like with the Heth Steeple, I do also recommend that you dual wield the katanas, because once you've got 2 of these in your hand and they're both infused with that Ice Lightning, Ring, you will be proccing the frost on your enemies pretty much instantly, and then once you do apply the frost, the following damage that you deal with both of these weapons is just outright ridiculous. Also, the Ash of War is somewhat usable in this case because it is an attacking move, so you're not just infusing the weapon with it and applying those two buffs, you do actually slam the sword into the ground, piercing through enemy shields and armor, dealing a nice amount of poise damage as well. So the fact that the Ash of War is actually usable and deals a considerable amount of damage, along with the ridiculous numbers you can do against enemies' health bars, sends it miles above the Heth Steep in my opinion. But we've got 3 more weapons that are even better than this, so if you thought that weapon was decent, let me introduce you to the weapon we've got at number 3, and that of course has to be the Royal's Greatsword, aka Blythe's Greatsword. So yep, we can indeed get Blythe's weapon that he uses throughout the game, so if you've ever seen Blythe and you go, wow, that's a pretty damn cool sword that you got there, sir, you can indeed get this weapon, but spoiler alert, we need to kind of kill him for it. So yeah, the way that you get this weapon is by completing Ranni's questline, and then once you've completed it in its entirety, if you then head back to Ranni's Rise, Blythe will be residing there, basically protecting the tower from anyone that tries to approach it, including ourselves, and because he becomes hostile due to that, we need to take him down, and then when we do, we get not only his sword, but also his attire as well. But of course, the thing that we're focusing on is his Royal's Greatsword, and it really is a much better upgrade on the Heth Steep. It does more damage and has a unique Ash of War, the Wolf's Assault, which essentially flings you forward, doing a catastrophic downwards attack followed by an ice explosion. The weapon itself deals 60 build up in terms of frost, but with that explosion at the end, it will then do 100 points of frost build up. So essentially, after 1 or 2 uses of the Ash of War, your enemy should then be affected by the frozen abilities. Because of this, you're pretty much constantly going to be doing the extra damage once your enemies are frozen, so even the harder and larger enemies in the game are going to be made a hell of a lot easier, and with just the base damage being a little bit higher than the Heth Steep, this thing just beats it all ends up. And just to continue on with the comparisons with the Heth Steep, again, this weapon scales heavily in both strength and intelligence, so essentially you can go down the same route of making a battle mage kind of build, having those longer range spells to keep your distance if you want to, but then like I say, you've got that unique Ash of War to plunge yourself forward, get right into the mix of the action, deal a large AoE effect with that Ice Blast, and just whittle away at your enemy's health bars. Of course, this weapon also gets bonus points by being tied to Blythe, possibly one of the better NPCs in the game, and as I say, you can also pick up his armor and complete the look and play the game as if you are him, but even if you don't want to do that and just want to use his sword, you will still just obliterate pretty much everything on your screen. I'll be honest, if it wasn't for the weapon that's going to come up in number 2, this would definitely be my favourite greatsword in the entire game, and again, if you want to play through the game again in New Game Plus and get 2 of these weapons, you will just power stance your way through the playthrough once again. But like I say, with all of those good points said about this particular greatsword, there's another one that's even better, and that's because at the number 2 spot, we have got ourselves the Darkmoon Greatsword. Yes, probably a weapon that you thought might be at number 1, it does find itself at number 2, and obviously we'll come to that in a moment, but actually just before getting Blythe's Greatsword, when you do complete Ranni's questline, you will actually be granted with this at the very end as well. The Darkmoon Greatsword is the latest iteration of the Moonlight Sword or the Moonlight Greatsword that finds its way throughout all of From Software's games, and this iteration that we get in Elden Ring certainly doesn't disappoint. One of the main reasons why this weapon finds itself in the number 2 spot is because unlike the previous weapons we've discussed, this can in fact be boosted by either talismans, magic boosting items, and even things like Terra Magica. Because of that, the Darkmoon Greatsword just absolutely trumps everything else in terms of a damage output. Of course, for those of you that don't know, the unique Ash of War with this weapon infuses it with the Darkmoon abilities and replaces your charged heavy with a wave of ice cold destruction, mixing that deadly charged heavy attack with all sorts of different spells and magic boosting items allows you to literally obliterate anything that you see on your screen. The other great thing about this weapon is it keeps its poise damage even with the projectile. Typically when you physically hit an enemy compared to a projectile, you do a lot more poise damage, but that's not the case with the Darkmoon Greatsword because either way you will be dealing 35 points worth of poise damage. This means that you can literally cheese the game by sitting at range, and after 2 or 3 successful hits of that projectile, your enemy's stance will be broken, allowing you to critical hit them. And not only will you be doing thousands of damage in the process, but you will most likely proc the frost damage, which is just absolutely catastrophic to any enemy in the game. This weapon is literally like turning on an easy mode slider onto the game, and is honestly one of my most favourite weapons in the entire game, and you're probably wondering, why is it not in the number 1 spot then? Well, that's unfortunately because numbers don't lie, and the weapon that we have in the number 1 spot is just a tad above in terms of damage output compared to the Darkmoon Greatsword. But just before I let you know what that mystery weapon is, if you don't mind me being a little bit cheeky and a little bit sneaky, by asking if you happen to like any part of this video or you're finding it interesting in any way, so please hit that like button down below. It helps me out a ton, and is also the quickest way of letting me know that you enjoy these videos and you want to see more top 5s like this one. Of course, for those of you that are new around the channel, this isn't the first top 5, and it definitely isn't the first Elden Ring video, and we've got a whole catalogue of different videos going to all sorts of different builds, keeping the game fresh and entertaining whilst we're waiting for that elusive DLC to hopefully drop in 2024. But if you are new around here and you want to stay up to date with everything else that happens on the channel, obviously make sure that you subscribe as well and hit that notification bell, and that way you'll stay up to date with all of the videos that come out in the future. But anyway, self-promotions and all that nonsense aside, the thing that you've been waiting for, what weapon is at the number 1 spot? Well, it just has to be the Death's Poker. Now, this weapon has got a reputation in the Elden Ring community already for just absolutely breaking the game with its damage output. Of course, first of all, just to let you know, in order to get this weapon, you need to head to this specific area in Caelid. It's towards the sort of southeast of the Caelid highway, and make sure that you actually come to this location at nighttime. That is because there is a Deathrite bird that will spawn in, and it only spawns in during the night. And once again, when you defeat this particular Deathrite bird, you will then be granted with the Death's Poker. As I mentioned, it's an incredibly broken weapon, mainly due to its Ash of War. That is because it has one of the most unique Ashes of War in the Ghost Flame Ignition. It is a 2-stage Ash of War that actually has 2 different outcomes in it depending on the follow-up move. So when you first use the Ash of War button, you will conjure up a Ghost Flame ball in front of you, and then by either following up with a heavy attack with the actual weapon or a light attack with the weapon, you will then do one of 2 moves. If you follow up with a heavy attack, you will do the Ghost Flame Explosion, doing a massive AoE attack to essentially take out a mass mob of enemies if you ever get stuck. Or if you do the light attack, and that's what we're going to talk about here, you will then leave a trail of the Ghost Flame which will constantly tick at your enemy's health. It actually lasts around about 5 seconds and can be chained multiple times, leaving multiple trails of Ghost Flame, dealing multiple ticks of damage, dealing multiple ticks of frost proc. The idea with this is to also use it up close and personal, because with that initial ball of Ghost Flame energy, you will then do an explosion when you use the light attack, dealing an extra 1000-2000 damage in the process. You can very easily break the game by increasing your intelligence a whole bunch, because that's what scales this particular Ash of War, using obviously the Ash of War talismans, again things like Terra Magica and the Magic Shroud in Crack Tier, and do thousands and thousands of damage in very quick succession. The original explosion also staggers enemies, meaning that you're more often than not going to be able to trap your enemies in those sort of lines of Ghost Flame damage and just constantly whittle away at their health. The only reason why I put it at the number 1 spot is because the damage potential with this thing is genuinely higher than like a bleed weapon or anything else that I've ever used in the game. So for the fact that it can just obliterate anything so quickly, it has to be at the top spot. The only thing I will say is it is a little bit repetitive, and the actual weapon itself isn't the greatest. It is a great sword, but it's not the best great sword in the world. It is heavily reliant on the fact that you use the Ash of War as its main damage output, because if you're not using that Ash of War, you may as well not use the weapon. So therefore it can get very repetitive and very boring just pressing the same 2 buttons all the time. If you're looking for a cool way to play the game and have a lot of fun, maybe this isn't the one for you, but certainly if you're struggling and you really need a weapon that's going to just obliterate any boss that you're struggling with, then this is the weapon for you. So there you have it. That is the top 5 frost weapons that you can use in Elden Ring right now. And just before you guys click off the video at the end, I just wanted to say, if you wanted a more detailed look at all of these weapons, we basically did a countdown to Christmas looking at some of the best frost weapons in the game, and these weapons do feature in that little mini series. So if you want to check that out along with some other weapons that didn't quite make it into the top 5, there will be a link in the description to go to that playlist, and you can obviously check that out, have a bit more detailed look with all of the stats, talismans, all that juicy goodness to basically mimic everything that you were seeing on screen. And other than that, I just wanted to say a big thank you for obviously watching this particular video. Like I said earlier, if you happen to like any part of it, do make sure that you hit that like button down below. That would be greatly appreciated. It lets me know that you've enjoyed it and you want to see more content like this. And I'm going to bring this back because I'm intrigued to see how many people actually make it to the end of these kinds of videos. So if you want to leave a comment saying that I am a legend, well, that you are a legend, the type I am a legend, I'll throw it on screen for you. I'm not calling myself a legend because you're the legend for making it all the way to the very end. Then I'll make sure that I can thank you all personally for obviously supporting the video, watching it all the way through, and just being the absolute legend that you are. Of course, also let me know if you agree with this list, because I'm always intrigued what you have to say and whether or not you agree with me, or you disagree with me entirely and you think something else deserved to be in the top spot, or at least in the top 5 that wasn't here. Make sure you also let me know in the comments about that. But realistically, that is everything that I have to say, so before I ramble on too much, I'll obviously let you go. Thank you again so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it, but I guess for now, I will catch you in the next video of whatever it is that we make. Bye bye.